Summaries here.
We're here.
That's like it.
Meeting minutes approval of May 1st. Are there any corrections or additions?
Cummings will make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from May 1st.
I'll see you in a second.
Motion by Cummings, second by Austin Poole to approve the minutes of May 1st. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. We will start off with a presentation then from Ehlers, Financial Management. You should have a big honking packet. It was very good. Was there anything you wanted to put up though, or no? We didn't need to? Is that what this is?
That's exactly what it is, right?
Yeah, it's exactly what we sent you and what I have to present on. So if everybody's got a copy of it, I don't necessarily need to put it up there unless you want to.
It's only if you needed to, you know, it'll be on the website. People can peruse it at their leisure. All right.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to present to the council. It's been, I think we were here last in March to present on the CIP and the debt scheduling. So this is the kind of the full entire component of your financial management plan that we've been working on over the last several months with staff and with the mayor. So again, my name is Jefferson. I'm a senior financial specialist with Ehlers. So we'll take you through this document. Feel free to stop me if you have any questions on it. It's a lot kind of to take in. So if there's something that comes up later, after you've had a chance to maybe review it a little bit more in depth or listen to my presentation, if you have questions, feel free to, you can reach out to us with those questions. So let's start just kind of at the second page, basically, which is what this is just basically going into our background, our processes, in terms of how we kind of got to this point in the process. The first thing we generally start off with is looking at the general obligation debt schedule, as what's known as your base case. We talked about that a little bit at the last meeting in March, but that basically is what are you currently paying for debt. So if you turn to page 4, that's kind of that visual representation, if you recall from our March meeting, of what your total general obligation debt payments are, less what we call abatements, so other sources of revenue that are helping to pay for that general obligation debt. So you have 3 sources that pay for general obligation debt outside of your property tax levy. So that includes revenue from Tier 3, water revenues, and then park impact fees. The park impact fees will be going away this year. This is the last year that those are paid. In the sort of towards the left-hand side, kind of in the middle, that net tax levy, that's your current tax levy. So that is what you are obligated to pay for debt currently. That's what the taxpayers are paying. And then on the very, even a little further left, or further right, excuse me, that's your tax rate per 1,000 of assessed value. So just as a reminder, you're limited in terms of the amount of debt, general obligation debt that you can have outstanding. It's 5% of your equalized value. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. So going to the next page, we just talked about here, and I'll just kind of gloss over this a little bit, but this is just your rating, our rating indicator. So we always like to put through sort of what the metrics are for and what credit rating agencies look at when they rate municipalities and municipal debt. So you're currently rated by Standard & Poor's, but the metrics that are shown in here, because Standard & Poor's doesn't publish metrics like Moody's does. Moody's has a guide, so this is kind of looking at a bit of a trying to get apples to apples here. And as you can see on that table, you show what Moody's is and what S&P is, and that basically kind of gives you what rating descriptions are. So you're currently rated as an A+. So that's still investment grade. You're still in an investment grade, but you're kind of in the middle of the overall rating of the rating categories. Some of those things you can control, some of those things you can't control. And it kind of goes through the next couple pages, pages 6 and 7 go through what those different areas are. So your accounting and tax base, obviously, that's tough to control a lot of times based on, economic factors sometimes that are under control. Finances are things that you obviously can control in some respects, depending on, things like your fund balance and cash balances. And then there is management. Obviously, you have to control that as to in terms of what your institutional framework is. Although, bear in mind, smaller communities, it's tougher because you have fewer staff oftentimes. So, there's obviously less ability. You don't have a full-time finance department like, the city of Madison does with multiple people. So, that's something. And then debt and pension. So what's your debt to full value ratio and debt to equity ratio? That's obviously something that you can kind of control, but obviously you need to balance that with the needs of the community in terms of what projects you need to do. And then this is right below that on page 7 at the very bottom. This is just some comments from your S&P rating. That was done on March 4th, 2020, so it's a relatively old rating, primarily because you haven't really gone out to market. Normally that's when you do debt ratings. When you do credit ratings is when you go out to market, go out to the competitive market for sale. So if you're just going to finance it like through the state trust fund or through like a local bank loan, you usually don't. But which we plan to do in the future to do a competitive debt issuance in the future based on your CID, we'll ask S&P to do another rating. At some point in time.
Because we did get downgraded.
You did,
A few
correct.
years ago.
Yes.
Because we had one bad year.
Well, because of how it was managed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so,
is that on a regular schedule, or do you have to ask them?
You have to ask them for it, and it would cost you. And that's why we say you really only want to do it when you're issuing debt, because that's your underwriters who are going to be buying your debt are going to be looking at your credit rating, and there's a cost. It's like it could be between like $16,000 and $20,000 to do a credit rating. And the reason you want to do it when you issue debt is because it's rolled into the cost of your issuance, so you're not actually paying out of like general fund monies.
wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but then we're not just gonna throw that money around, okay.
Yeah,
But-
yeah, if there's no real, because really, if you're not issuing debt, again, it's just kind of it'd be a bit of a feel good, you can show it, but you're really, it's not
Which we
really.
will be because of Hendricks.
Correct, yeah.
This is gonna happen.
Yeah, so you want to do it ahead of it, and then set the bar for the next few years.
So, yeah, you'll actually, every time you do issue debt, you would, or go out to competitive sale, you would ask for a credit rating. So, yeah, so,
If we went to our local bank.
yeah, if you went to your local bank, you're not
But
gonna.
we'll research that before.
But what does it do for us? Because I know we dropped down,
Yeah.
because we were double A,
Yeah.
and then we dropped down
Yeah.
to a single A,
Yeah.
but still an A plus. But what does that do for us? Do we get better
You
rates?
do, yeah, it's likely that you'll get better interest rates. You'll be, you're more competitive in the market, the better your credit rate is. Just like if you're financed, your personal, it's just like your personal, yeah, you get better rates.
Good, thank you.
Yep. Page 8 it just shows the table of some financial indicator comparisons. So we asked the city kind of who do you look at in terms of your peer communities for different financial indicators. So we pulled some of those together that you typically use, and the ones that are kind of in the area are very similar. I wouldn't dwell a whole lot on this. This is kind of for information purposes. A lot of things are local. Every local municipality does things a little bit differently, but this kind of helps it benchmark a little bit.
Well, why is our state not rated then?
So you're technically, so this is Moody's. You're not rated by Moody's, you're rated by
Oh, okay,
S&P.
this is Moody's.
Yeah, this is Moody's. So Lodi, Sauk City, and Cross Plains, they're all, I believe, S&P as well too. So, because Moody's is a little more forthcoming with its information than S&P is. Just the nature of the rating agencies that are out there. Okay, let's see, if we want to turn to page 9, this goes into your financial plan data tables, and we talked about this a little bit in March, which is related to your TID in and TID out equalized value. So we project out what your equalized value, or I should say, we take a look at your historic equalized value, and then look at your projected equalized value, both with your assuming your TID district valuations, and then TID without the TID district valuation. So the one thing in the model that we did note, and I believe we talked about this in March, is that we're assuming zero growth. So we're being relatively conservative in terms of the growth that's occurring outside of TIDs. So assuming zero growth. If you have growth outside the TIDs, that's awesome, but we want to be conservative on this in terms of what your values are, and keep it relatively low. Equalized value in the TID, though, we're projecting to have about a 2% value increase over the term of the projection period. So that goes through evaluation of 2030. The next page, on page 10, that's just your TID out, again, so that shows that 0% at the bottom. You've roughly had a historical equalized valuation of TID out about 10.8%, so I would think that it probably is going to be, somewhere in that neighborhood. Obviously, we just wanted to keep it kind of kind of keeping a baseline that's very, very low in terms of projections. You can see there's a big spike. I just noticed this. I've noted this with a lot of other FMPs that I've done. There's a big spike in 2022. That's obviously with the housing market that we've seen statewide. Everybody's seen a relatively large jump in their utilized value. Starting to see things come down a little bit more as well. So, any questions so far? Okay. In the middle of page 10, so this is kind of the new stuff that we haven't talked about yet. This is your operating budget, so talking about your projections for your operating budget. So we'll start off talking about on the revenue side of things. So as you know, you're limited in terms of the amount of revenue that you can generate. The state has imposed levy limit restrictions based on net new construction. So what we're showing here is about a 0.5% increase in your tax levy revenues. So your allowable levy, the amount that you're able to tax your residents for services. And that's based on your historical net new construction numbers. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, or just talk about a little bit later, showing kind of that visualization, what that means sort of in a dollar amount. So basically what this kind of means is that you're gonna likely have to figure out, how you're gonna pay for stuff. So that could be using fund balance to potentially offset expenditures in a certain year. It could be looking for new sources of revenues, or we have some other options that we'll discuss in a little bit. So the other item of this is, and we'll talk about this on the tables in a little bit, is that your other non-levy revenue sources. So things like your permits, your aids, transportation, the state aids, those sorts of things that will also remain relatively flat, but we've actually projected about 2% roughly for those. So a little bit of a bump in there, but we're not assuming that you're going to see all of a sudden, 50% increase in your permit revenue, for example, or a 10% increase in state share revenue. It is good that the state has allowed for additional funds in shared revenue, and that's tied to increases, so it's not going to be stagnant any longer. But the reality kind of has been that that's really kind of been a maybe 3-year reprieve over what you need in terms of what your funding sources are. So it was a good injection into a lot of local governments, more so for some than others, but ultimately it's kind of like, okay, we've got that point now, we're still seeing increases in expenditures that we need to fund for. So on page 11, that sort of talks about where we're at in terms of what we're projecting out for your expenditures over the period of time. So we're roughly estimating about a 3.9% increase on average throughout all your categories, all your budgeted line items over that period of time. So as you can see, the math doesn't math, right? So if you have a 0.5% net new construction and a roughly almost 4% increase on average of your expenditures, that doesn't really necessarily work out. Now, that being said, what are the options that you can do? Well, revenue sources, looking for new revenue sources, which are somewhat limited, cutting costs any way that you can, trying to find efficiencies, or making reductions in operational costs, that sort of thing. So, but obviously there's service implications with that as well too. So, if you go to starting at page 12, this just talks about what our forecast codes are and what we've assumed in terms of expenditure codes. So we group all of your line items into 5 different codes. So we go through your entire budget, we run through every single line item that's in that budget, and we give a code to it. So commodities, that's things like fuel, office supplies, operating supplies, utilities, uniforms, office furniture, and equipment, that's a 3% increase. Employee insurance, which we've seen across the board in a lot of places, like anywhere between 8 to 15%. In a lot of cases, we put you at 11%. That's health, dental, life insurance, post-employee health plan, long-term disability, property and liability insurance at 3%, services at 3%, and then wages at 3% too. So obviously, these are projections. Bear in mind, obviously those things can fluctuate and vary, as you actually get what their actual cost is during budget time. The table on page 13 that basically distills all that information down into what your revenue categories and expenditure categories are. So, and what's the projected out. So the revenues are categories based on property taxes, other taxes, and that's like pilot payments, your intergovernmental, so your state aids and such, licenses, permits, fines and penalties, public charges for services, your investment income or interest income, and then just miscellaneous income. And then expenditures are grouped by your general government, so, city hall, things of that nature, public safety, police and fire, public works, the DPW department, health and human services, and then conservation development, and then any transfers out. The main kind of key here that I just want to point out is sort of that middle where that orange row is, that says percentage change, and then below that is your net change. So this shows that your, and you can obviously see by the bolded numbers, the revenues and the expenditures of where that deficit starts hitting. And then if you go below that, what that does to your fund balance. So what we've assumed here under this model is that you're utilizing fund balance, so your reserves to help balance your budget. And over time, you can imagine what that happens is that you have a structural deficit within your budget. Again, worst case scenario, you have to pay, you have to dip into your reserves in order to make and balance the budget, and then that reduces your fund balance. The reason we point that out is that we're talking about credit ratings before. One of the things that credit rating agencies look at is healthy fund balance, and you do have a healthy fund balance right now. And you also have a policy that establishes what your fund balance needs to be, which is 25 to 33% of general fund operating budgeted expenditures. So that's sort of where you have to sort of make those maybe potentially hard choices of what are you going to do in terms of being able to increase revenues or reduce expenditures. You don't want to dip into fund balance too much. Credit rating agencies don't like that because obviously it shows a structural deficit that's occurring in local government. And unfortunately, we're not, local governments aren't the federal government, you can't deficit spend, state and local governments can't deficit spend, so you always have to have a balanced budget. Page 14, that shows visually in the middle of the page, table 9, what the projection of your fund balance is over time. And I will stress, this is not uncommon at all. You guys are not uncommon. You are very common. This is a very common problem that a lot of municipalities have. Simply because rising expenditures and not revenue sources. So, but this just visually represents what that chart was showing, where your fund balance is going. So obviously, very healthy in 2025, still healthy in 2026 and 2027, 2028 is starting to dip into that kind of area where you're at the lower threshold of what your policy states, and then 2029 is sort of where you're now no longer within your policy. So. This is, again, the categories that are shown here, you have unassigned and assigned. So assigned are things that you've dedicated funds for in the future in your capital improvement plan. So projects that you've chosen, or portions of projects that you've chosen to pay for in cash, which is okay to do. That's acceptable to do that because your borrowing requirements. Your unassigned things are funds that are just not assigned. They don't have any purpose behind them. It's simply just cash on hand that's liquid. And then the really don't see non-spendable or restricted. Just a small portion of non-spendable. Those are prepaid items that you always have to pay for, which is about $15,000. Any questions so far? All right. So, starting at page 15 is your capital finance plan. So what we talked about back in March, so I'll give just kind of high-level detail. We made some adjustments from that meeting. There were some projects the mayor wanted to change around and how things were going to be, paid for. So that's been adjusted. We've, though, kept it basically the debt levy relatively the same as what you saw back in March. So that was the overall goal, was to still keep your debt levy at a certain point. So we'll kind of start on page 16. That just shows your financing plan, when you're going to be issuing debt for the next several years, starting in 2025. Really, 2027 and 2030 is likely when, if this would be your CIP, what your capital improvement plan is how much debt you want to issue, we would look to go to market in 27 and 30. So we would want to do a potentially competitive sale, or maybe a negotiated sale, really would depend, but we want to go out to the market, so go out to not just a local bank or state trust fund.
So more when it's over $1 million.
Correct, yeah, and that's usually when, that's kind of the sweet spot in terms of when you wanted potentially to go out. It's more attractive for underwriters. Something as small like $650,000 or $295,000, that's not going to generate much interest in the bond market, basically. But usually over $1 million, it can be. Not saying it is, it always is, and we'll look at that at that point in time for you, if it makes sense to do competitive sale, or maybe find a negotiated underwriter to work with it. So. On the next page, 17, that's just your impact of your financing plan. So this is just an update of what we presented in March. The orange columns are your proposed debt. Really the goal here was to stabilize the levy, so your debt levy, so that those middle numbers where it says total net debt service levy, we wanted to stabilize that at about $780,000 up into 2032. So we would be adding roughly around $53,000 to about $56,000 in levied debt over the next 6 to 7 years. So that would stabilize it. There's a big drop off in 2033 because that's when debt potentially would come on for new projects if the city would choose to do so, if they wanted to do it. But that's kind of I give a cushion there to allow you if you needed to issue additional debt for projects at that point in time. So that's
road project, yeah.
Yep.
I would.
Yep. Yep.
And doing this for the 53, 56, we will keep the.
Yeah, the idea behind it is to try and keep it at that point by 2031 to keep it at a level amount. So we're gonna have to ramp it up a little bit because you are doing a number of projects. It's to basically to keep it so you're not having too many peaks and valleys, but a gradual increase over that period of time. On page 18, that's your general obligation debt capacity for the proposed debt. So as I said, if you remember, 5% of your equalized value is your limitation based on state statute. Your policy, if you recall, is 3.75% of your tax increment district out valuation. So your valuation is that is basically 13.2 million. That's what your internal policy is. So what we're looking at here is if you're adding on the new debt, total new debt over this period of time, you're roughly topping out at about 28% of your limit. So very, very, very safe, very manageable. You're not in any kind of worry, of exceeding that. You obviously want to be able to have some cushion for emergencies. If you do need to borrow for something catastrophic, that that gives you some cushion.
So you guys recommended though that
we do. So under that policy, so the city's current policy, and that is visually represented here below that with the debt limit analysis here. So that just shows you where your the blue amount at the bottom of the chart shows your existing principal that's outstanding, so your current debt. The orange is adding the new debt. So look at basically the numbers on the left-hand side correspond with the colors, and then on the right-hand side are the percentages. So the green line here, the trend line there, is your debt limit, so your statutory debt limit. The percentage of that limit is shown in the I'm sorry. Back up. I'm my mistake. The green line is also tied to the left axis, so that dollar amount, and the red line is also tied to the left axis. The only one that isn't is the purple line. That just shows you what your percentage is over the period of time. So as you can see, if you look at that green line, that's your statutory debt limit. So that obviously goes up as your values increase. The red line, or the maroon line, that's your policy. So as you can see, as you get further out, that gap increases. So we would recommend potentially looking at revising that internal policy. It's still good to have an internal, internal debt policy. A lot of communities do it. But it may restrict your ability to issue debt at some point in time, particularly if it's an emergency. Because as you can see, you're not necessarily keeping up with that percentage. That statutory debt limit is going to get higher, while yours is remaining relatively flat. Now, if you have value being added outside of your TID, then it might be okay. So I don't necessarily think you need to go ahead and revise it like today, or even maybe next year, but just kind of be aware of it and see kind of how it's tracking. And if you want to, we have plenty of example policies that we can provide to the city to make that change. And then one last item, which we also noted too as a potential policy changes. This is just your debt service payment policy. So it's based on a percentage of your governmental operating revenue. So what your debt levy has to be is can't be any higher than I believe it's 15% of your general government operating revenues. So as you can see, that's also, you're kind of coming into a point in 2029 where that policy is going to come in conflict with what your operating revenues are going to be. Again, not something right now that you need to change, something to be aware of and look at in the future, to look at, because obviously you don't want to run afoul of your policy. Obviously it's policy, that's why you have it there. So, any questions? All right. Going on to page 20, this is your projected property tax impacts. I do want to note here, we do need to make some updates to these tables. So while this is still, and this is, I would say, this is still in draft form, I should say high-level draft form, but obviously if there's anything that anybody notices or maybe would like to tweak or change in here, we can obviously make those changes. And then we'll finish all that up, we'll get it all bound, and we'll send it off to you guys, so you guys can have nice hard copies of these stuff. For fun reading pleasure. So the table below here though, that shows what your levied funds are. So you have a number of different funds: general fund, fire and EMS, parks, your community development authority, your library, and then your debt service fund. You total all those together, and that's what your total levy is, and then that's how you get your tax rate. So really, don't really focus on the bottom portion here that should have been included. It's really what your tax rate is in the middle here. And that's based on that $100,000 of property valuation. So you can see a steady climb in that tax rate overall. Relatively minor though, it's like 18 cents, 19 cents, 18 cents, 19 cents. So, and obviously that likely will, I will say that will likely fluctuate, because if your values are increasing, it's a likelihood that if you have larger value in what I always tell communities is that people think, oh, my assessed value went up, or my values went up. Well, if your assessed value is, like for me, in the city of Milwaukee, my assessed value went up, but my neighbors didn't, so my tax bill went up this year. But if all my neighbors are going up at the same rate as mine is, and the levy remains relatively flat, you're not going to see big jumps in your tax bill for the most part. The next page then is just that's a visual representation of tax levy. We do need to adjust this. This should be based on equalized value. This is a little high. This should be a little bit high on that line with the tax rate. But the levy amounts there, you just show what those total tax levy is. And that tax levy, remember, is both your operating levy, that funds your operations, as well as your debt service levy. So the new debt that you're bringing on is included, and those orange lines. And then page 22, table 16, that just shows your components. So obviously the biggest component of your levy is your general fund, and then followed by fire and EMS. I should say, let's take that back. Followed by existing debt and then new debt. So debt and general fund, those are the biggest chunks, and then followed by EMS and library. And then we'll talk about this at the beginning of the presentation. But if you go to page, you can skip over 23 and go to page 24. We do a check to make sure that when we present the FMP that you are complying with levy limits. So this is, table 17 is our version of the levy limit worksheet that you're required to fill out by the state to ensure that you're complying with your levy limits. Really three kind of takeaways here. One, you're in compliance, your F&P is in compliance with levy limits, based on the projections that we have. So, your levy is good from a state standpoint, although it's maybe not necessarily good from an operational standpoint, but it's good from a state standpoint. The second thing is in the middle of the chart here is what your net new construction percentage is, and then your dollar amount, what that equates to. So if you start sort of at the kind of in the middle where it says 2025, 2026, go down to the middle of the chart, you have assumed net new construction percentage of 0.5%. That then translates to $9,441. That's what your actual levy increase is allowed to be. So obviously if that goes up, you have more levy. If that goes down, you have less levy. I have, but even if you're going up, if you bump that up to 1%, it's still only getting you, if it would be double that, it's still only about maybe $20,000 give or take. So, and obviously, at the bottom here, we're just claiming your debt service, the amount that you're levying for debt service, because that obviously is part of your calculation. Remember, debt service, your debt service levy is not subject to levy limits. It's really just subject to your internal policy in terms of how much debt you're allowed, and then also legally to your statutory debt amount. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. Won't go into a whole lot of detail on the next couple pages. This is section 6. This just goes through your tax increment financing districts. So we just do a synopsis of them here. In the appendices at the back of the report, those go through, that includes your increment projections and your cash flow analyses. So the only one I guess I really want to kind of touch on is TID 3, because that's the one that is, it's an industrial district, and we've been talking with the mayor about potentially finding ways to maybe spur development there and maybe reclassify it and all. Yeah. Primarily because and you'll see this with the cash flow projections, is that it really starts a deficit in 2028. We've extended the life of the district out to 2038, which you're allowed to do under statute. You're allowed to do that. But it would likely be about 1.3 million is needed still to close the district successfully in 2038. So there's options. If you're not seeing development, there's options where some of the students may be able to donate to that TID if at all possible. So the top of the radar, and we're obviously we're still a ways away, but obviously want to.
But I didn't think this one could get a donor.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. It can. Yeah, because this is an industrial. I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. Unless they change the law.
Right.
Yeah. Unless they
Which I'm
change.
pushing for.
Yeah.
I know the league is.
Yeah. The league is
Right.
pushing to make some changes.
We
with
just talked
regards
about
to-
it again on Wednesday.
Yeah. And in particular, with mixed use districts, there's a big push because you're limited in terms of the amount of residential units or percentage of residential units and newly platted residential. There's a limitation on that. And what we're hearing, what the league is hearing, what hopefully the legislature is hearing is that everybody needs housing. Everybody needs multifamily, everybody needs single family. So to try and incentivize that would potentially be helpful. Okay. So on page 30 is just some of our general conclusions and observations. And then on page 31 is some of our recommendations. So just kind of general conclusions. You had very strong liquidity, very good and very adequate debt management and management overall. And your liability profiles are good, but you do have some weak items related to your economy, your budgetary performance over history. Again, that's based on your credit rating. So I think some of those things potentially would change when you do a new credit rating. And then we want to give kudos to adopting a comprehensive capital improvement plan. That's a very, very good step forward in terms of being able to financially manage a plan for the future. So it helps you forecast your long-term needs, costs, as well as provide guidance and planning for debt. So Obviously, continue to update that as much as you can. Every single year, recommend you do it with your budget process. Let's talk about doing that. So you want to obviously make sure you're always keeping your future projects in mind. One thing, obviously is levy limits, as we talked about, they're going to be a constraining factor for you. So you're really going to have to look at creative budgeting or ways to try and find new revenue, or look at potential levy limit referendum. And that's kind of what we go into under your recommendations here. Is looking at under your revenue policies, what are those things that you could do? So we touched on this a little bit in March, but you do have two revenue sources in aids. You have your local transportation aids or your state transportation aids, and you have your exempt computer aid. So those are things that they're not restricted. You're currently using them for your capital improvement plan to help offset some of that debt cost, but those revenues could be potentially used for operations. Again, don't necessarily have to make a decision even for next year's budget, but that is something that can potentially help offset some of those revenue challenges that you have. Obviously, there's the corresponding issue with that is then you're likely going to have to borrow a little bit more. But if you remember, your debt service levy is not exempt, or is exempt from levy limits. So again, it's something to think about looking at.
The question is the general transportation aid, we were under the impression it had to be used for road projects. And then we always thought that, and then, so that is 100%, we're not going to be penalized by if we needed to do that.
Yeah, it was always, historically, and when I say historically, probably, before really the current levy limits were impacted, or current levy limits were imposed back in 2010, 2011. It was probably a lot of communities did that because they didn't have they had the ability to raise revenues other ways, right? They weren't restricted to net new construction on their tax levy. What most communities have done subsequently, and all the communities, again, I was a city administrator for 4 years. I was assistant city administrator for 6 years before I joined Ehlers. All the communities that I have, our general transportation aids were primarily used for operational expenditures. So so there's no restrictions on that. Now, a lot of would tell you if you have let's say a budget deficit, particularly like in your public works department, obviously that corresponds to the general transportation aids. But there's no penalty for doing that. And most
Clarify that, that's what you said.
And it's really the really kind of I will say too is another thing with your transportation aids is it's based on the amount of money that you spend on your street project. So if you're doing a street project and you report what the cost is for that's reported to the state, and then you likely get more money in your transportation aids.
But if we use that GTA for anything but street projects, that doesn't, because you still have to report the street project.
Correct.
We just did a parking lot, we got dinged $3,000 because we didn't, that 60-year rolling average dropped because we didn't.
Right.
But that's why we saved general transportation aid for road projects.
So that's true. That's very true. You could, and that's kind of the policy. That's a policy decision that you're not restricted in terms of statutorily how you do it.
We're going to get dinged the way we use it if we don't do a road project, period.
Correct,
Okay.
So if you don't do, in a year you don't do a road project, that basically is under the zero and on your, or I should say, if you, let's say, didn't report anything.
Another thing I'm trying to get you. Roads did go down, we didn't set some loop roads.
It is a bit, I will say, I think it's a bit of it's an unusual way, I think, to kind of fund it because, it's not really, it is somewhat, it's based on lane miles and a lot of other things too, but it really is like, you still have roads to maintain no matter what. You spend money on new ones or not, so,
So you're not going to do a road project every year.
Exactly, so. Then a couple other, just kind of recommendations, fund balance. Potentially recommending changing your fund balance policy to calculate as an unassigned fund balance as a percentage of your general fund revenues instead of your current policy, which is your operating expenditure budget. So that actually really just more in lines with how rating agencies look at it. So they're looking at it from the standpoint of what's your cash on hand as a percentage of the revenues that you generate versus the expenditures that you incur. So, the debt policies, we touched on this a little bit earlier, just at that 3.75 of TIDOT equalized value, potentially looking at adjusting that to a capacity that would take into that the growth outside of, or not just outside of the TID districts, but also inside of it. And then your current debt service policy payments of that not exceeding 15%. And again, if there is any questions or if you wanted to have, sample policies, there are other communities that, we can send them to them. We can send them to you guys and, and take a look at them. There are other communities that do have, debt service policies. Rating agencies, obviously, the policies that you have to kind of manage your debt really well and ensure that you're not overextending yourself. Again, most Wisconsin communities don't, from our experience, but there's always, most Wisconsin communities are pretty conservative on the whole of how they spend their money, which is good, comparison to other communities in other states. So, but anything you can do to, any policies that you have to kind of, ensure that you're living within your means is always looked at as a positive from a rating agency standpoint. And then investment policies, we have an investment arm and you invest through us, and we've been working with them to maximize your investments. When you do issue debt too, that's another important component. There are IRS restrictions, obviously, and we want to ensure that if you are doing anything in terms of issuing debt, that you're spending it down in an appropriate manner, or that that we're able to help you track what those spend down amounts are, and also what your interest earnings are on those, because oftentimes you issue tax exempt debt, the IRS says, well, you have restrictions on how much you're able to earn on those debt revenues. So. And then the capital improvement policy, just continue to update it, that's one thing, and then you could consider amending your policy to require an analysis of the impact of the capital improvement plan, just to ensure that it's in compliance with debt-related policies. So again, if you're regularly doing your CIP through your budgetary process, having a policy saying, we're going to make sure to look at this, so we're not adding things in on later years that could potentially put us over the debt limit that we have. So just to make the policy kind of ensure that future budgets or future plans are staying in line with your policies and with statute. Any questions? No, it's a lot.
Do you see the state raising the levy limit at all?
No, I don't, unfortunately. I think that there might be some, well, let me walk that back a little bit. I think that there might be, there may be an ability to have an inflationary adjustment.
Like a cost of living or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, there might be some wiggle room there. The one kind of, I guess, issue is what the legislature, when they passed the shared revenue bill, a lot of them kind of took the victory lap on that and saying, hey, now we've re-upped this and we've gotten back to where we needed to be with that. But what I don't think that they've heard the other side of saying, well, we still don't have what we need in order to function. So that's going to have to be that next conversation. I don't necessarily really think that like the innovation grants and the innovation fund are going to do enough. I think there are some communities that will benefit from that, of getting money back from the state if they can show that they are consolidating services and that they're able to, realize the savings from that on both sides, right, or however many are involved. But oftentimes what we've heard from, and on a lead call not too long ago, maybe 5 months ago, is that a lot of places are just, for instance, EMS as an example, are struggling to just be able to service what they have right now. And actually, they need an influx of cash in order to raise their service levels, because they're not at the service levels they need.
That's the innovation grant we got.
Is that, okay.
Yeah, we're.
You got one, okay, well, that's good, yeah. Yeah, the study, yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I think there is possibly some, and I don't, I think that's another, that's a tool in the toolbox in terms of communities to look at is, are there ways to consolidate services? Sometimes consolidation works.
Different ways to do the buckets of money, too, that it's just strictly for, like, general GTA was originally roads, but now for anything.
Correct.
Now they're trying to figure out, well, is there just an influx that we do strictly for the emergency services?
Yeah, that's another thing too. And I think that's probably where you're going to see, I think from who's in the legislature, I think if you're talking public safety, if you're talking police, fire, EMS, yeah, they're going to listen to that stuff. But that's obviously your core services, right? That's municipal core services. Those are the big three. Those are the really big three. I'll say public works is in there as well too, but I mean.
We like public.
But
They're on their phone.
I'm always, as a city administrator, I argue that public works was public safety to an extent, because if they're not plowing the roads, the ambulance is not getting through.
Correct, I say that all the time, absolutely. They gotta get us there.
Yeah, so I think, if you lobby your legislatures, and they'll listen.
I did last Wednesday.
Okay, good. That's really kind of we don't take a policy position or anything like that, in terms of, but I think one of the things we hear from the league all the time is you get out in front of your legislators and say, hey, here's what we're dealing with in concrete examples. As anecdotally, when I was an administrator, met with my state legislatures in the Milwaukee area and said, and realized that, well, consolidation wasn't necessarily the answer. And I don't say the answer, but it actually costs money to consolidate in this particular instance, that we were providing an example to. So, yeah, I think it's having the conversations, really, because I think a lot of times that there's a disconnect that's there, that they don't really fully understand what you guys have to go through when you're setting your budget, and, prioritizing things in meetings of be as thirsty as possible. So.
That's pretty tough to do.
Yeah.
I mean, what did you get that last engine that went up $100,000?
Yeah.
So you gotta cut somewhere else to make things, make everybody happy.
Yeah.
That ain't easy.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was a lot.
Yeah, again, it is a lot. It's a 50-some page document, so I threw a lot at you tonight. Feel free to look through it. Starting on so after page 32, those are the appendices. So that goes into appendix A, just as all of your line items for your revenues and expenditures that are part of your budget in your general fund, and what those projections are. That goes in for a couple of pages. Appendix B, which starts on B1, that's your capital improvement plan and your funding uses. So a list of all the different projects that you would like to undertake in the next 7 years. And then the following page after that, starting on C1, appendix C, that's your tax increment district. So your and actually, if you want to just go to C1, I can kind of explain what that looks like here. So the first page, and these are all they're all the same. They just have obviously different numbers because they're different districts. But the information on the type of district is at the top, and then your increment projections at the bottom here. So, and I always point out too is your construction year. So your values lag 3 years behind in your districts, in your tax increment district. So your construction year. So if it's construction year at the top here, 2021. Saw a negative valuation, unfortunately, that year, but the valuation doesn't kick in until 2022, because it says of January 1st, and then your revenue year is 2023, so when you actually tax for that, and then what your tax rates are and what your increment is projected. We've tied out based on your current audits, so I think we have this would be based on your 2023, because I don't think we have your 2024 yet, so. So this is just based on your 2023 audit. We'll update these once we do get your information on your audits and your tax increment worksheet that you get from the state. What you've just as a note, the tax rates have been going down on tax increment districts simply because the equalized valuation has been going up. So it's again the percentage of what's your total, as your valuation goes up. And what is your what your levies are? Your levies aren't going up in corresponding increase to what your valuation is, you see your tax rates go down, no, that doesn't necessarily mean, we're not concerned about not having enough funds to cover expenditures and that kind of thing in your districts, but just as a, we just show it here as that tax rate as $17.19. That likely is probably gonna go down this year, to equalize value, which is good, because you're adding value, that's the important part. That's the main thing, it is adding value to your districts, so. And then, C2, that's your cash flow projections, so that's the standard model for cash flow projections. Your projected revenues are shown on the left-hand side, your projected expenditures are shown on the right-hand side, and then what the balances are. So as you can see, in this case, for TID 2, your revenues are, actually, you have a cumulative fund balance right now for that district. So that district is not only a positive cash flow, but has a positive cash balance associated with it too. And then we just showed the projected year of closure. This was just projected to close out in 2039. Potentially, you could close it out earlier if you wanted. Well, actually, that, you might be able to close that one. Yeah, it looks like you should be able to. But you have to be careful. You obviously wanted, I always caution communities like you say, oh, we've got a cumulative fund balance and we have, we're projecting to close out at the end of the district's life. If you close it out, remember, then obviously you lose the ability to, if you have a project coming in, if you have a developer who wants to locate that district, you don't want to, you lost that incentive to close it early. So you want to kind of temper that, is that if you know when if you know you're going to have potential development in the coming years, you probably don't want to necessarily close it because you don't want to necessarily lose out on the opportunity if they need to put in streets or add infrastructure, or if you want to incentivize it in some way. Really kind of that 2033 mark here, and on all these, there's a dotted blue line shown on these cash flow projections. That's your end of your expenditure period. So that's really where you would, really kind of look at saying, okay, are we having any other expenditures in the next couple of years? If 2033, if it's not the case, you're not having expenditures then, or you haven't expended anything since from now until then, you don't have any debt incurred.
You could technically close it.
You could technically probably close it, yeah.
Is there benefit that they pay more, or you get an incentive to close early?
Not necessarily, no. Obviously that gets put back on the tax roll, and if you have a cumulative balance in the district, those revenues then will get dispersed to the taxing jurisdictions based on their percentage, how much of a percentage of their taxes were at the outset of the.
That's when we closed the first TIF contract, we used all of that for the new road, so.
Yeah, so it's an influx in cash that will help, helps the general fund. And obviously now you've got value added in overall.
Right.
And that can potentially help with your levy, in some respects, because you added value. So, there are some benefits to it if you wanted to do it, but it's kind of like you have to temper and look at, what's the kind of totality of all the circumstances that are there.
And then we lose the following year, because when you close a TIF, that's what happened when we closed TIF 1, then the following year we lost whatever revenue and then it got reset.
Correct, yeah. So you lose a little bit of that revenue the next year. But overall, if you wanted to, a lot of the times, like the city I was, that I was administrator for, we closed the TIF and we were able to lower the tax rate. And so actually taxes went down for most residents. But, that's obviously, that was the end of the life. I think we closed 2 years early. So we were past the expenditure period. There was going to be no new construction, and we ended up creating another TID sort of somewhat in this place, not entirely, but some places that can make all the problems. Okay, and I think that is it. Yeah, that is it. So, any questions again for me?
Thank you.
And we do recommend, I should say, we'll get the finalized version with those changes in here. Again, if anybody has any changes, just let Marilana know, and we can make those updates. But we would recommend that you adopt this.
Right, but are you gonna do the final update, because we've had our audit done for 2020.
Oh, you want to do that, we can do the final
That way
update.
it's more current from 2020.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, we can do that.
And then when I get the TID report.
We TID report, we'll send those.
Send that to
Yep.
you, on that, but that's gonna be,
Yeah.
working on it, but.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to do it.
Thank you very much.
We're happy.
Appreciate it.
I'm glad it didn't storm that bad when we got out this.
Yeah, I don't think we had a whole lot of anything here.
Yeah. I was getting all the notifications that thunderstorm warning, tornado warning. I'm driving, it's sunny, so I guess it's not here.
All right, thank you very much. Citizen input, I'm assuming you're here for the chickens?
I'm here,
No, well, the chicken thing is on here, so welcome.
You want me to talk about it?
No, not yet,
Okay.
because it's on the agenda. All right, meeting summary since the last meeting, water and light, Richard.
In our first meeting, we did introductions. We discussed some of the layouts of the agenda and the partisan payment, or pay request number 23.
Okay. Cable, nothing. Finance, Charlie?
With the exception of things that are later on down in the agenda for council, most of our items were deferred due to lack of information or needed action at a later date.
Okay. Sounds good. Consent agenda items, those are in your packet. I don't see anything for the library, Humane Society, I've gotten anything. Did they do?
They didn't have their meeting yet in Main Society, I got it yesterday and it's all zeros.
Okay.
The contract's up next year, is that, you mean,
So, I have to look, I don't know.
Yeah, we definitely need to do that.
Yeah.
I wanted that for a long
I
time.
think it's next year.
All the service contracts, we gotta make sure we know when they all are.
Yep.
All right, so these just need your approval.
Also go with motion to approve consent agenda items.
Cummings, a second. Motion by Austin Poole, second by Cummings to approve the consent agenda items. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Old business, all right. This is the chicken pen height. This was the email that I had gotten from Gunther, something about the 5-foot ruling. So what more do we know about it here? There will be a height minimum of 5 feet for all fencing. So is that what we're supposed to look at? Yeah. So I believe the 5-foot rule is meant for a run, where the run is not enclosed on the top.
So basically, we're requiring that they are enclosed, so we could actually probably just strike this.
Remove it, yep. So where that is, where it says there will be a height
The
minimum?
fifth
Yeah,
one,
the fifth
there
one
will be
down.
a minimum of 5 feet for all fencing in the district.
But does that do anything else?
No,
So who's gonna go to clean it, midgets?
that has nothing to do with what we're discussing.
A height minimum of 5 feet for all fencing. So if there's a cover on it, it could be 3 feet? That's where we're going with this?
Essentially, yes.
But, so we don't have to say anything besides that, 5 feet minimum,
Usually the
unless
5
it's
feet
covered?
was so things couldn't jump over and get in it.
Yeah.
But because it's covered already,
We should just
But I-
take it completely out.
So how do we know everything is gonna be covered though?
because that's also
That's
a
what we're
it's required
requiring that.
down farther, it's required that it be enclosed. Chicken should be kept in a fenced-in, covered chicken coop or covered run at all times.
So we're just,
It's redundant.
we're just asking to have this line removed.
Okay,
Cummings will make that motion to take that fifth line out, that's the height minimum of 5 feet for all fencing for the pilot program for the chickens.
Charles School second.
all right. Motion by Cummings, second by Charlie Cool to remove 5-foot redundant line item. Any other questions, comments? Is that gonna make everybody happy? Go chickens. How many
Permits?
permits have been taken out? 5? Woo-hoo. All right. Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carried, that's done. Water tower action, now he's leaving. All right, water tower action, so this was brought up a while ago. In fact, it was meeting number, October 3rd, 2024. Kind of when it started, we went round and round. So Jeannie and I kind of went back and forth, and Lana too, talking about this. Originally kind of started off with a memorandum of understanding, and then as we kind of got into it more and more and started asking more and more questions, there is no PSC requirement that says we have to do it. The insurance has already been eliminated. So other than it just sitting there being a utility tower, there's no reason for us to do anything with it. So if something happens and there's a storm and it tips over, it's covered to take care of whatever it would land on, but we do not want to rebuild it. And if down the road one day the utilities decide they want to tear it down, they can. The city does not need to be involved in it.
So it will remain on
The utilities, because it is really their asset. There's no reason to give it to us. If Chad wants to mow around it, I already offered his services, because we're basically up there anyway around the cemetery, so there's really nothing else they need to do to it. And we did have some people in here, and they were kind of excited about it getting torn down, which nobody really has that on their radar at the moment. But if something happens, the utility's the one that put it up. The utility had the donations that painted it, which some of the stuff's not even accurate, unfortunately, but still history. So my recommendation is to do nothing with it. Just leave it on the utility. And because we never really brought it back, we just need to make that firm or determination or whatever you want.
I'm in a mindset that we don't need to do anything because no action was taken the last time this was brought up. So basically, it's a utility asset and no council action was taken to assume it or not assume it.
Yeah, we just had, city was gonna take a look at, looking at a memorandum of understanding. That was the action, that was it. Okay.
So the utility gets to do with it what they please.
Yes, there's,
Their asset.
yeah,
I'll make sure that they're aware of that.
I think the utility at the time we discussed it and referred it to the city was under, I don't want to say the impression, the PSC will not allow the utility to expend funds to keep the water tower there. Therefore, if the city did not take it over, I do believe the utility was going to remove it.
and they can, that is totally their option. There is no, we've got to confirm through the PSC and the lawyers that there's, because they're not
It is
spending.
confirmed.
Yeah, they're not spending any money on it. The PSC will not make them get rid of it.
It's only if there was a cost that they could, maybe in the future,
Okay,
require
PSC.
that. But at this point, there's not even a statute or anything on that or that they could be applying for it. So they won't have costs, we remove insurance, and
Yep.
Chad's been volunteered to do it. Don't get mad at me, that was the mayor on that
Yeah.
one.
I want to confirm the PSC's indicated that the utility would not have to remove it
Correct,
if it was no longer being used.
correct.
Yep.
Lawyers and everybody.
The only concern
And then Barry's had all this
is if
information.
there was a cost that they could have an issue with it, but now there's no cost to them to have it.
Just the destruction of it,
If they decide to do that.
dismantling.
Yeah, if they decide to do it, but based on the inspection, that's nothing in the near future if they don't want to, so.
Yep. So are we taking no action on no action then? All right. There is no more water tower discussion. Done with that. All right, new business, removal of 254 Jefferson Street, the McKay Nursery, old office building. All right, so what is it that we need to do with this here? Isaac at council?
It's
You guys
it's
are-
raising a building according to our ordinance. We have to have council approval to raise.
Nothing the planning commission needed to know.
Really?
Yes.
All right,
Yes,
then.
it's-
Charlie
it's-
wrote it during
Yes, it's because we're removing
an asset.
asset
basically.
off the tax rolls.
Yeah. But it's also an eyesore off the tax rolls.
So,
Okay. Yes, so was there a specific,
The building inspector's already reviewed it, and
Yeah. he's ready to go when I tell him that he can, do the.
So where does it tell us, like, what specific things that, like, council has to make a motion to? There's a lot here.
It's in our ordinance.
Is there a redevelopment?
Oh, so this is just, well, this is an ordinance right here, so it's
Yeah,
in here.
that's the ordinance.
What are they gonna put there?
At the moment,
Nothing.
nothing, but they are contemplating either another shed or perhaps housing. They're just not sure. So right now, they had to get rid of the asbestos and all these other things. Because originally, they started painting it and it's gonna fix the roof until they realized how bad it was inside. And then we had to wait another year to get the funds to be able to afford to tear it down. Because this won't be cheap.
Some kind of plan, you know, what they're gonna do with it?
No, we don't need one at the moment. They're just gonna tear it down. It'll make Priscilla very happy. Then he said,
Building shop.
all right. We won't get a whole lot out of it anyway. Piece of
There's
crap.
no utilities hooked up to it.
Yeah, there's
It's
nothing there.
basically a derelict building.
Kind of like another one we got in town, but I won't go there. So we just need a motion to approve, and that's,
Then I'll notify the
there you go.
building inspector.
Cummings will make a motion to approve the removal of 254 Jefferson Street, McKay Nursery building.
Austin, Cool, second.
Motion by Cummings, second by Austin Cool, to approve the removal of the old building on 254 Jefferson Street. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
I figured you would. All right, motion carried. All right, recommendations, boards and committees, finance, Charlie, what you got?
We have April 2025 financial statements, payroll in the amount of $89,316.99. General disbursements in the amount of $349,631.82. And the clerk treasurer's report on file at City Hall. I will make a motion to accept those.
Where will second?
Motion by Charlie Cool, second by Willard, to approve the financial statements as listed. Roll call, Cummings, yes.
Austin, Cool, yes.
Charles Cole, yes.
Griffin, yes.
Thomas, yes.
Where, yes?
That's why
Motion carried. Resolution 2025-23. This actually came from Jefferson County, and it's an actual team that Waterloo is a part of. And as Casey was talking earlier about this innovation grants and all these things that are out there, they even moved this grant out like several months because people just aren't applying for it. So it's kind of it's an interesting situation, but they were attempting to figure out a way to get municipalities a little bit more help. So we've been talking about EMS problems that we've had, all municipalities, for many, many years. So part of this group through Jefferson County, the way these grants are set up, anybody with under 5,000 population can apply for it. And since we're about the only one in that group that fit that mold and had somebody on staff, versus a lot of these townships don't, have full-time people. So they came to us, they wrote it all up. Lana and I just signed it, sent it in 2 weeks, within, boom, we got it. We actually got the money before we even knew we had it. So there's no matching grant, there's nothing the city needs to do. This is really all gonna be administered through Jefferson County. Just had our first meeting on Wednesday, so people were very happy that we got this money to do these studies and try and figure out a way to solve everybody's EMS problems. And part of the conversation, and I'll be sharing all of this with you guys too as we get them, but this university, CITY, that are doing these studies, they'll be giving us, a whole scope of work and, the different things that everybody kind of threw in of what all of our problems were. And a lot of it had to do with just basic overall funding too, what municipalities pay versus what townships pay, and the differences that everybody kind of does all over the place, and see if there's a way to kind of standardize it. Because the township's getting the same benefit as the city, same service, but yet they pay way less. But they also can't always afford it, so
Anyway, there's an awful lot to it. So this resolution, again, no matching, nothing else that we really needed to do. It goes right back to Jefferson County, and we're just gonna try and solve an EMS problem if we can.
12 months.
Yeah, this lasts for 12 months, and Jefferson County does have some money set aside that if we need to extend this a few more months, they will pick up that tab. So it just needs your approval. It was supposed to be on a month ago, but it was.
No.
I had an email.
No, it wasn't supposed to be.
Okay. I wanted it to be on here over a month ago. Yes, it's okay, it doesn't matter, because it's not matching.
Anyway,
Right,
it's just.
right. It's a formality, but it's part of our policy, yes.
Charles will make a motion for resolution 2025-23, approving the receipt of the innovation grant for Jefferson County.
Wade will second.
Motion by Charlie Poole, second by Ware, to approve resolution 2025-23. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. All right, discussion on the police lieutenant wages and comp time.
We discussed this at finance, and there's some situations that are coming up that our lieutenant is covering a lot of different shifts and accruing probably more comp time than he's been able to do. This has happened in the past with Gene, when she first started with having us approve a plan to allow that to be exceeded, and then potentially be paid out at some time in the future, because there's just not physically enough time for him to utilize the time that he's accrued before his anniversary date. So we're gonna work through some of those details, and hopefully it'll be back at next meeting.
Yeah, so it is deferred. All right, water and light then. Port Send, I don't know how many more we got left coming, but here's another one. Amount due this application, $477,174.20. And all the other little information's all in your back.
Cummings will make that motion for that set amount.
Charles Gold, second.
Motion by Cummings, second by Charlie Poole, to approve the Port Send pay number 23. Roll call?
Cummings, yes.
Austin, yes.
Charles Gold, yes.
Griffin, yes.
Thomas, yes.
Wade, yes.
Leslie, yes.
Motion carried. The other two items are informational as part of the Big Honkin' packet. A lot of pictures for those of us that were there. We had a nice little tour. All right. Waterloo Fire and EMS maintenance contract, Charlie?
This was a maintenance contract that is be presented to council for action. It's in regard to some of the more advanced equipment that we have with defibs and so on and so forth that have expiring maintenance contracts on them. Those were originally donated by the supporters group. A lot of funding came, or anonymous donations, basically. And so we're working through the logistics of how to pay for that, because it's coming to us at mid-budget year. So it's how we disseminate that the rest of this year. So that'll be coming back for council at a later date.
Another defer. And then Public Works, the job descriptions, Charlie?
Same with this, there's been some progress made on revising and improving the job descriptions of both the DPW supervisor and the parks coordinator. We made some changes in the past week that need to be reviewed, so that'll be coming back at a later date as well.
Also deferred. All right, future agenda items and announcements. I got a few things. This weekend at River Bend is Heroes Weekend. I don't know if the police, anybody gonna be there?
I don't believe so.
No? Okay. But I believe it's for military, police, firefighters, first responders, healthcare workers, and teachers. And I believe some of it is gonna be benefiting the Waterloo Fire Department. Like they must be raising funds, so. Anyway, there's stuff that's going on there on Saturday from 11 till 5. Run walk, parade, all kinds of good stuff, so it's on the Riverbend website. Riverbend website. Then I believe the pancake breakfast is also Sunday, 8 to 12. They are gone. And
Fire station.
at the fire station, yeah. And I will not be there because I have a dance recital. And then Monday, Assembly Fitzgerald, she wasn't available on Wednesday when I toured the Capitol, so she won't be coming here on Monday. Actually, I think that might be the holiday. Anyway, she's coming here. So I'll be touring her around Waterloo and see if we can get her to see a municipal side of things, which would be lovely. So, anybody else?
What is this?
Bullying?
Okay.
That is not on.
I'm sorry, I should have put it on your thing.
You can still read it. It's an update that we're working on.
Just joking.
It's an update for the handbook.
Okay, got it.
Jean's just sharing.
I like it. Thanks for sharing.
Nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
So, anybody else?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Charlie Cool, second by Ware, to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Virtual. Nothing to stop. Oh, you didn't know?
Sorry.
I did.
I didn't either, and then I was like, accomplish pictures. Got it, noted.
We got hit hard. Yes.
Yep.
And you came out on that, right?
I was gonna say, I saw that he's supposed to.
Oh, yeah, he has a really good trip. All kinds of good stuff. Well, Sammy thought he was great for this company.
When they were here.
And then the boss said, yeah, I don't think you're gonna be a good fit for us.
Right, I called you, just wanted to.
Yeah.